Very briefly, in response to a very important question of some of the important achievements of the law of the sea, I'm just going to hit the big picture here for a moment. For at least 500 years, there's been a struggle in ocean space and how nations deal with oceans between an understanding that you need to protect navigational freedom and the need to move further seaward in developing the fisheries and the oil and gas and the economic potential of the oceans. Initially, we were stuck in trying to draw a single line in the oceans called the territorial sea, and you couldn't resolve the two that way. Mm-hmm. The brilliance of the law of the sea negotiation and what it permitted in UNCLOS 3 is to resolve those two on a functional, differentiated basis so that now we have full navigational freedom in the oceans, in fact, even stronger than what we had before UNCLOS because of straits and other provisions that are perhaps the most important single economic issue in the oceans for every country in the world. That's really the mechanism for international trade in the world. And on the other hand, we're able to move forward with extending resource jurisdiction, et cetera. So every one of the ASEAN countries, every country in the world that's a coastal state, gets a huge benefit in extending jurisdiction out to 200 nautical miles in fisheries and continental margin, in some cases even beyond 200 nautical miles. So this has been an enormous success. This is one of the most important multilateral treaties in the history of the world. It's up there with the UN Charter and very few others.
Thank you. Anyone else? We have one of the questions was the territorial boundaries on the land versus the sea.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, and this is just me speaking, but it's sort of what I read into the history. China has been much more concerned about resolving its land boundary disputes than it has on the maritime side up until now. Mm-hmm. It's got almost all of them resolved. Mm-hmm. In the land side, it only has one relatively small maritime boundary with Vietnam that's been done. That's not to say that they won't be moving into the maritime boundary side. They talk about wanting to do that. The difficulty in the South China Sea is that because of the nature of the claims and the overlapping claims from the other countries, that it's very difficult to, at least for me, to envision how you could have bilateral discussions where there are multiple claims involved, and that's how that evolves in China's perspective is something that we'll have to see.
If I could follow on that comment, Ash is right. I mean, the singular exception on land borders, of course, is India, as we have seen even in recent days with what seemed on the face of it to be a potential for a real confrontation. I don't have all the details yet, but when you're dealing with disputes between two states over a border, it necessarily, however difficult it may be, it's going to be much more malleable than this incredibly complex, I dare say, overlapping Venn diagrams and what have you. I mean, there's just not a lot of precedent for that. I think what we need to acknowledge with China is, and this is not to defend everything that has emanated from China on these issues, but China's a work in progress. The question of what are China's China defines its interests in a way that sounds sufficiently anodyne that who can be opposed to them. But there's a lot that has to be thrashed out internally in China in order for China to come to some kind of a requisite definition of its interests externally as they might link into that. And that's going to be something that is continuing. It's not for China alone to do. A lot of this will be a function of how China perceives the attitudes of both its neighbors and of the United States. That's one reason why I think the United States has to be exceedingly careful about how it proceeds here, lest those in China who resist or are overtly opposed to tolerable dispute resolution will use, if you will, the U.S. thumb on the scale as an argument and a justification for not proceeding in ways that I do think would be to a far greater collective benefit. The fact that I now know that I've been promised that it's going to be at least 2 years, could be a lot longer
Yeah.
than that for the tribunal to rule. I mean, in effect, it means it gives us, there's time here. And I don't want to, I mean, sometimes you buy time because it's a good thing. In this particular case, to the degree that this is the product of very careful deliberation and adjudication, I think it would increase the legitimacy of whatever comes out of this process. And that's going to be something that will affect all parties concerned.